There is something happening to you that doesn't fit into the normal rules of how reality is supposed to work, and the strange part is you don't have proof of it in the traditional sense. You only have the experience of it, the feeling of it, the quiet certainty that something has shifted and you are no longer perceiving the world the way you used to. You try to explain it to yourself at first, not even to others, but even in your own mind the explanation feels incomplete, like you are trying to force something vast into language that was never designed to hold it. And so you hesitate, you question yourself, you wonder if you are overthinking, if you are imagining patterns that aren't really there. But then it happens again, and then again, and then again. And slowly doubt begins to lose its strength because repetition has a way of revealing truth. Moments begin to line up in ways that feel too precise, too intentional, as if something is responding to you from behind the surface of things. Conversations appear at exactly the moment you need them. Answers arrive before you even fully understand the question, and your inner world begins to feel more alive, more structured, more real than the external world you move through every day. This is not random, and somewhere deep inside you already know that, even if you cannot fully explain why. This is the territory that Carl Jung spent his life exploring, not as abstract philosophy, but as lived psychological reality. And what he discovered was something that most people never consciously encounter, that the human mind is not a fixed system, it is layered, and when certain layers begin to activate, perception itself changes. What you are experiencing is not a breakdown, it is an expansion. But expansion does not feel comfortable at first. It feels disorienting. It feels uncertain. It feels like the ground you once stood on is no longer stable, because it isn't. You are beginning to perceive reality from a deeper level, and once that begins, it does not reverse, it unfolds. And there are specific signs that this process has already begun, not vague ideas, not abstract theories, but real psychological experiences that follow a pattern. And in this video, you are going to recognize 5 of them. 5 shifts that quietly reveal that your perception is changing in ways you cannot reverse. Now let's discuss the shifts. Shift 1. When events stop feeling random. At first, it's subtle enough that you can ignore it. Small coincidences that seem interesting but not important. You think of someone and they message you. You remember a place, and suddenly you hear its name mentioned somewhere. You notice something repeating once or twice and you dismiss it as chance. But then it doesn't stop, and what was once occasional becomes frequent, and what was once frequent becomes constant, until you reach a point where coincidence no longer feels like an explanation that fits. It begins to feel like something else entirely, something structured, something connected in a way that does not follow the normal logic of cause and effect. You begin to notice patterns that are too precise to ignore, not just in major events, but in the smallest details. Things that seem insignificant at first, but repeat themselves with strange consistency, like seeing the same numbers again and again. 11:11, 3:33, 4:44, appearing on clocks, receipts, screens, moments that feel ordinary on the surface, but carry a strange sense of timing beneath them. You start noticing how certain thoughts are followed by specific external events, how questions seem to generate answers without effort, how information appears at exactly the moment it becomes relevant. And this is where the experience becomes difficult to ignore, because it is no longer random enough to dismiss and not predictable enough to control. It exists in a space between those two extremes, and that space is where your perception begins to shift. Jung described this as a meaningful connection that does not rely on physical causation, but you don't need the definition to feel it. You experience it directly, and once you do, something changes in how you relate to reality itself. But here is where it becomes unsettling, because the more aware you become of these patterns, the less you can pretend they are accidental, and at the same time you cannot prove them to anyone else. You cannot recreate them on demand. You cannot demonstrate them in a controlled way. They appear when they appear, and they disappear the moment you try to force them, and this creates a strange tension where you know something is happening, but you cannot validate it externally. And this is often the first moment where you feel the distance between your experience and the way others perceive the world, because to them everything is still random, still disconnected, still explainable, and to you, it is not. Shift 2. When your mind stops needing one answer. There was a time when things felt simpler, not because reality was simple, but because your mind organized it that way. Everything had to fall into a category, right or wrong, good or bad, true or false, and your sense of stability came from choosing one side and rejecting the other. But at some point that structure begins to break down, and not gradually, but in a way that feels almost sudden, where you start seeing both sides of something at the same time, not as a theory, but as a direct experience. You feel sadness and clarity at once. You see how something painful can also be necessary. You understand how opposing ideas can both hold truth without cancelling each other out. And instead of resolving the contradiction, your mind expands to contain it. This is not comfortable at first, because it removes the certainty you were used to. It forces you to exist without a single clear answer, and that can feel destabilizing, because certainty gives control, and now control is slipping. But as this continues, something else begins to emerge. A different kind of stability, not based on having the right answer, but on being able to hold multiple truths at the same time. You no longer feel the need to choose immediately. You can sit in the tension without collapsing it, and this changes how you experience everything, because life no longer appears as a set of problems to solve, but as a set of realities to understand. And this is where the separation begins to grow, because most people are still operating within a system that requires clarity. They need to know what is right, what is wrong, what side to stand on, but you are no longer able to fully commit to that structure, not because you are indecisive, but because you can see too much. You see the complexity behind every position, the truth and the limitation in every perspective, and this makes it difficult to engage in the kind of certainty that others rely on. You are not losing clarity. You are moving beyond a simplified version of it, and that shift changes how you relate to the world in a way that cannot be undone, because once you have experienced reality without needing it to be reduced, you cannot return to reducing it again. Shift 3. When your inner world starts speaking clearly. At some point something happens that is impossible to dismiss, because it does not come from the outside, it comes from within, and it arrives with a level of clarity that feels different from normal thought. Your dreams begin to change, not just in content but in quality. They become more vivid, more structured, more intentional, and you are no longer just watching them, you are inside them, aware of them, sometimes even aware that you are dreaming while the experience continues. And then something even more unusual begins to happen. The boundary between dream and waking life starts to blur, not in a confusing way, but in a way that suggests they are connected. You begin to dream of situations that later occur, conversations that unfold exactly as you experienced them, and it doesn't happen once. It happens enough times that you can no longer dismiss it as coincidence. And with this comes a different kind of understanding, one that does not feel like thinking, but like remembering something you did not consciously learn. There are moments where insights arrive fully formed, where you wake up with clarity that was not there before, where something inside you seems to already know what you are trying to figure out, and this changes how you relate to your own mind, because it no longer feels like a single layer. It feels like something deeper is communicating upward. And this is where it becomes difficult to explain, because to someone who has not experienced it, it sounds like imagination, like interpretation, like projection, but to you it does not feel like that at all. It feels direct. It feels real. It carries a weight that normal thoughts do not carry, and over time your inner world begins to feel just as significant, if not more, than your external one. And once that shift happens, once your inner world begins to speak in a way that feels structured and meaningful, you cannot go back to ignoring it, because you have experienced what it is capable of, and that changes how you listen, how you observe, how you understand yourself in a way that continues to unfold. Shift 4. When you realize you are not just the person you've been. At a certain point, the shift becomes impossible to ignore, not because of what is happening outside of you, but because of what is happening inside, because your sense of identity itself begins to change in a way that is subtle at first, but then becomes undeniable. You begin to notice that there is a separation between you and your thoughts, not in a distant or detached way, but in a clear and immediate way, as if there is something within you that is watching your thoughts as they arise, instead of being completely absorbed in them. You're in the middle of a conversation, and at the same time you are aware of yourself in that conversation, noticing the tone of your voice, the reactions forming in your body, the emotions that appear and disappear as the moment unfolds. And this awareness does not feel forced. It feels natural, as if it has always been there, but you are only now becoming conscious of it. And the more you notice this, the more it expands, because you begin to see that it is not just your thoughts you are observing, it is your entire experience, your reactions, your habits, your patterns, even the way you respond to certain situations begins to reveal itself in real time, and this creates a strange kind of distance, not a disconnection, but a clarity, because you are no longer fully identified with everything that happens inside you. You feel something, but at the same time you are aware of the feeling. You react to something, but at the same time you can see the reaction as it forms. And this changes how you experience yourself, because you begin to realize that you are not just the content of your mind, you are also the awareness that is observing it. But this realization does not come without tension, because the identity you have built over time does not disappear quietly. It resists. It tries to reassert itself. It tries to interpret this awareness in a way that keeps itself at the center. It begins to create narratives about what this means, about who you are becoming, about why this is happening, and this is where confusion can arise, because the same awareness that is revealing something deeper can also be pulled back into identification if you are not careful. You may find yourself feeling clear one moment, and then completely caught in your thoughts the next, feeling expanded, and then suddenly limited again. And this fluctuation can feel frustrating until you begin to understand that it is part of the process. Because what is actually happening is not the loss of identity, it is the reorganization of it. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming aware of something that was always present beneath the identity you thought was fixed. And this awareness does not replace who you are, it expands it. You begin to exist in two layers at the same time, the layer that lives, acts, speaks, and responds, and the layer that observes, understands, and remains aware of everything as it unfolds. And the more this stabilizes, the more natural it becomes, until eventually it is no longer something you notice occasionally. It becomes the way you experience yourself. And once this shift stabilizes, something important becomes clear, that you are not limited to the role you have been playing, that the identity you thought defined you is only one expression of something much larger. And this realization changes how you move through the world, because you are no longer completely bound by your patterns. You can see them as they happen, and in seeing them, you gain a kind of freedom that was not available before. Not total control, not complete detachment, but a subtle and powerful shift where you are no longer entirely driven by unconscious reactions. You are aware of them, and that awareness itself begins to change how you respond. Shift 5. When your life starts feeling like a pattern instead of random events, and then something even deeper begins to reveal itself, something that changes not just how you see yourself, but how you see your entire life, because events begin to feel different, not isolated, not disconnected, but part of something that is unfolding with a kind of consistency that is difficult to ignore. You start noticing how certain themes repeat, how similar situations appear in different forms, how the same types of challenges seem to return until something within you shifts. And at first, this may feel frustrating, like you are going in circles, like you are facing the same things again and again, but then something changes in how you perceive it. Instead of seeing these repetitions as random or unfortunate, you begin to see them as meaningful, not in a forced or artificial way, but in a way that feels inherent, as if there is a pattern beneath your experiences that is shaping them. You notice how certain relationships mirror aspects of yourself, how certain situations bring out specific responses, how certain challenges push you in directions you would not have chosen consciously, and this begins to create a sense that your life is not just a series of unrelated events, but a process that is unfolding through you. This does not mean everything is predetermined, and it does not mean you lose your ability to choose, but it does change how you understand what is happening, because you begin to see that your choices are not happening in isolation. They are interacting with something larger, something that seems to guide the overall direction even when the details are uncertain. You begin to feel that there is a structure to your experiences, not a rigid structure, but a dynamic one that adapts and responds, but still carries a kind of coherence that you can sense even if you cannot fully map it out. And this realization changes how you relate to difficulty, because challenges no longer feel like interruptions to your life. They feel like part of it, part of the movement, part of the unfolding. And this does not remove the discomfort. It does not make everything easy, but it changes the meaning of what you are going through. What once felt like random struggle begins to feel like transformation. What once felt like confusion begins to feel like a process that is leading somewhere, even if you cannot yet see where. And the more you observe this, the more it reveals itself, because once you begin to recognize patterns, your awareness becomes more sensitive to them. You start seeing connections that were always there but unnoticed. You begin to understand your experiences, not just in terms of what is happening, but in terms of why they might be happening, not in a rigid or fixed way, but in a way that opens up new perspectives. And this does something important. It shifts you from feeling like life is happening to you, to feeling like you are participating in something that is unfolding through you. And once that shift happens, it cannot be undone, because you can no longer look at your life the same way. You can no longer see events as completely random. You begin to sense the continuity, the underlying movement, the way one experience leads into another in ways that are not always obvious but are deeply connected. And this creates a different kind of awareness, one that is not focused only on the present moment, but on the larger arc that your experiences are forming over time. By the time you reach this point, something has already changed. Whether you fully understand it or not, whether you can explain it or not, your perception is no longer what it used to be, and that change is not temporary. It is not something that will simply fade away. It is something that continues to unfold, sometimes clearly, sometimes subtly, but always moving forward. And this is where doubt often tries to return, where you question whether what you are experiencing is real, whether you are reading too much into things, whether you are creating meaning where none exists. And that doubt is natural, because what you are experiencing does not fit into the frameworks you were taught to trust. But the key difference is this: doubt may question the experience, but it does not erase it, because the experience continues. It repeats, it deepens, it reveals itself in ways that cannot be dismissed indefinitely, and over time the repetition itself becomes its own form of clarity. You begin to see that what you are going through is not random, it is not accidental, it is not a mistake, it is a process, one that many people may never consciously recognize, but one that you are now aware of, whether you asked for it or not. And this awareness changes everything, not because it gives you all the answers, but because it changes the questions. It changes how you look at your experiences, how you interpret what is happening, how you relate to your own mind and to the world around you. You are no longer just reacting to life. You are observing it, participating in it, understanding it on multiple levels at the same time, and that creates a depth that was not there before. And while it may feel isolating at times, because not everyone around you is experiencing the same shift, it is important to understand that isolation is not the final state. It is part of the transition, part of moving from one way of perceiving reality to another, and over time that transition stabilizes. It becomes integrated. It becomes something you can live with rather than something you are trying to understand. What you are experiencing is not a breakdown. It is not a loss of clarity. It is not a departure from reality. It is an expansion of it, an expansion of how you perceive, how you understand, how you experience yourself and the world. And once that expansion begins, it does not reverse.